The day the Duke of Ashwick looked straight through his own wife, Lady Seraphina Wentworth Ashwick, was the day something small and fragile inside her chest finally stopped hopping. She had been standing in the grand hall of Ashwick Manor, a letter in her hand detailing the suffering of families in the village after a harsh winter. Her heart had been full of purpose. She had rehearsed the words carefully on her walk down the corridor, smoothing her dove-gray morning dress, steadying her breath. She would tell him about the children with no shoes, the elderly with no firewood. She would ask, as his Duchess, for permission to allocate a modest sum from the household accounts to help. He had been descending the staircase, tall and impossibly handsome in his dark riding coat, his expression carved from winter itself. For one moment her hope had surged. He would see her, truly see her. He would listen. But the Duke of Ashwick, Julian Ashwick, a man who commanded respect from Parliament to the furthest reaches of his vast estates, merely glanced in her direction. His cool gray eyes passed over her face as if she were a piece of furniture he did not recall purchasing. He turned toward his steward, who had appeared at his elbow, and continued a conversation about crop yields without a flicker of acknowledgement. Seraphina stood there, the letter trembling in her hand, the words dying in her throat. The great hall, with its ancestral portraits and cold marble floors, seemed to swallow her whole. She was 23 years old, married for 2 years, and she had just become invisible. She did not cry. She did not call after him. She simply folded the letter, tucked it into her sleeve, and walked back to her private sitting room, the room where she spent most of her days, the room where no one came looking for her. That evening, she sat alone at the long dining table, a solitary place setting gleaming under candlelight. The Duke had ridden out to inspect a distant property and would not return until late. The footmen served her in silence. The soup grew cold. Seraphina realized she had been waiting for love that was never meant to arrive. Something shifted that night, quietly, permanently. The marriage had been arranged, of course. The Wentworth family had possessed an ancient name, a crumbling estate and staggering debts. The Duke of Ashwick, wealthy beyond measure and in need of an heir, had agreed to settle everything in exchange for her hand. Seraphina had known the terms. She had walked into the union with a foolish, tender hope that affection might grow. For the first year she had tried desperately to please him. She had learned his favorite dishes and instructed the cook. She had worn the colors he was rumored to admire. She had studied estate management, politics, art, anything she thought might spark a conversation and earn a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. He had remained polite, distant, unmoved. He was never cruel, never raised his voice. He simply treated her as a decorative obligation, a necessary fixture in his well-ordered life. She was given a generous allowance, a beautiful set of rooms and a title, but she was never given his heart. After the morning in the hall, Seraphina stopped trying. The shift was so subtle that even her lady's maid did not notice it immediately. She no longer inquired about the Duke's schedule. She no longer lingered in the corridors hoping to encounter him. She began taking her meals on a tray in her sitting room, claiming a headache or fatigue. She had no headaches. She simply could not bear another silent dinner under the weight of his indifference. Her heart did not break all at once. It had been cracking for 2 years. But that day, the final fracture settled into place, and a strange, cold calm followed. It was almost a relief. Wanting something so desperately was exhausting. Letting go felt like putting down a heavy burden she had not realized she was carrying. A week later, on a gray morning, Seraphina did something she had never dared before. She slipped out of the manor alone, wearing a plain wool cloak, and walked the muddy path down to the village of Ashwick Green. The winter had been brutal. She had heard the reports from her maid, who had family in the village. She had seen the thin faces of children from the carriage window. The letter she had tried to show the Duke had come from the village doctor, an old friend of her late father's, a man named Nathaniel Whitmore. He had written not to the Duke, but to her, knowing her heart. The village was worse than she had imagined. Cottages sagged with damp. Coughs echoed from open doorways. A woman with hollow cheeks clutched a wailing infant, and Seraphina felt the cry lodge itself beneath her ribs. She found Dr. Whitmore in a cramped dispensary next to the blacksmith's shop. He was a man of 30, with kind brown eyes and hands that were always gentle. He looked up from grinding herbs and stared. "Lady Ashwick," he said, surprise softening his voice, "you came yourself." "Please, Nathaniel, just Seraphina here." She pulled back her hood. "Show me how to help." That was the beginning of her secret. Not a scandalous secret, nothing that would shame the Ashwick name, but a secret nonetheless. She began visiting the village twice a week, always in her plainest dress, always on foot through the back gardens. She brought food from the manor kitchens, wrapped in cloth. She brought medicines Dr. Whitmore had requested, purchased with her own pin money. She sat beside sick children, held the hands of frightened mothers, and listened to the worries of elderly farmers. No one at the manor noticed. The Duke was consumed with business, with Parliament, with his prize thoroughbreds. The housekeeper assumed her grace was resting. The maids were simply relieved their mistress asked for so little. In the village, she found something she had nearly forgotten existed: purpose. The people did not care that she was a duchess. They cared that she was there, that she remembered their names, that she brought blankets and broth and hope. And for the first time in her marriage, Seraphina felt her own worth, independent of her husband's approval. A month passed. Spring crept hesitantly over the hills. The Duke was away in London for 3 weeks, and Seraphina felt a lightness in his absence she had not anticipated. The manor seemed to breathe easier. She certainly did. She threw herself into the village work. A particular project began to take shape in her mind. A small schoolroom where the village children could learn their letters and numbers, where the girls especially might have a chance at something beyond poverty. Dr. Whitmore had a spare room attached to the dispensary that he offered without hesitation. "You do that?" she had asked, eyes bright. "For you, for the village, of course." His smile held a warmth that made her chest ache. "You're doing more good than anyone in that great house ever has." She ignored the flicker of guilt. She was still the Duchess of Ashwick, but her husband had made it excruciatingly clear that her opinions held no value, so she would act on her own. She purchased slates and chalk, primers and pencils. She hired a gentle young widow, Mrs. Eliza Rowe, to serve as teacher. Seraphina herself would visit the school when she could, reading stories to the children, helping with letters. The children called her Lady Sarah, and their laughter was the brightest music she had known in years. When the Duke returned from London, he found a changed household. His wife was polite, composed, and utterly distant. She greeted him in the entrance hall with a proper curtsy, inquired about his journey, and then excused herself to attend to correspondence. She did not linger. She did not ask if he had thought of her while he was away. Julian Ashwick, Duke of Ashwick, stood in the marble foyer with his traveling cloak still over his arm and felt an unfamiliar sensation: disorientation. He had grown accustomed to Seraphina's quiet eagerness, her hopeful glances, her small attempts to bridge the distance between them. He had found it mildly irritating, like a persistent bird tapping at a window. Now the tapping had stopped, and the silence was oddly loud. He dismissed it. She was probably tired. The winter had been long. She would return to her usual self. But she did not. The first crack in his indifference came at a dinner party 2 weeks later. Lord and Lady Bramwell were visiting, along with their insufferably charming son, Mr. Henry Bramwell. Julian had little patience for social gatherings, but the Bramwells held political influence he needed. Seraphina descended the staircase in a gown of deep sapphire, her hair arranged with simple elegance, her expression serene. She looked beautiful, Julian realized with a jolt. Not merely pretty, not merely appropriate. Beautiful. When had he last truly looked at her? At dinner, Mr. Henry Bramwell, a man with an easy laugh and an eye for attractive women, seated himself beside Seraphina. Julian watched from the head of the table as his wife conversed with the young man. She spoke with animation, her eyes bright, her smile genuine. She laughed at something Bramwell said, a soft, musical sound Julian had not heard directed at him in months. A hot, unfamiliar sensation coiled in his chest. He identified it only after several uncomfortable moments. Jealousy. He was jealous. Of Henry Bramwell's smile. Of his own wife's laughter. He tried to catch Seraphina's eye, to draw her into a conversation, to reassert some invisible claim. But she did not look his way. Not once. After the guests had retired, Julian found himself standing outside her bedchamber door. He had not visited her rooms in months, not since the early, awkward weeks of their marriage when duty had compelled him. He had no words prepared. He simply felt a sudden, urgent need to see her, to confirm that she was still his wife, that the distance he had created was not permanent. He knocked. Her maid opened the door, surprised. "I wish to speak with Her Grace." A pause. Seraphina appeared behind the maid, already in a dressing gown, her hair loosened over her shoulders. Her expression was calm, curious, entirely unflustered. "Your Grace, is something wrong?" He searched her face for a hint of the old longing. There was none. "No, I merely wished to see if you were well." "I am perfectly well, thank you." She waited. He did not move. Was there anything else? He felt foolish. "No, good night, Seraphina." "Good night, Julian." She closed the door. He stood in the corridor, the faint scent of lavender lingering, and realized she had called him by his given name for the first time in months, and it had sounded like a farewell. The emotional triggers came faster now, as if fate had decided to punish him for his years of blindness. A week later, Julian returned early from a ride and decided to walk through the gardens. The afternoon was mild, the first roses beginning to bud. He intended to find his steward but stopped short at the sight of a figure on the far path. Seraphina, in a simple gray dress, was walking toward the back gate that led to the village lane. She carried a large basket covered with a cloth. She moved quickly, glancing over her shoulder as if she did not wish to be seen. Julian's instincts stirred. He followed, keeping a distance. He watched her slip through the gate and disappear down the wooded path. Something cold settled in his stomach. Secrets. His wife had secrets. He did not confront her immediately. He was a duke, a strategist. He would gather information. The following morning, he summoned his head groom, a man who knew every whisper in the district. "My wife," Julian said evenly, "has been walking to the village frequently. What business does she have there?" The groom hesitated. "I'm not certain, Your Grace. I believe she visits the dispensary, Dr. Whitmore's place." The cold in Julian's stomach solidified into something sharp. Dr. Whitmore, a young, unmarried physician, a man with kind eyes, as Julian recalled, and a reputation for charm. That evening he watched Seraphina across the dinner table. She ate quietly, responding to his questions with polite monosyllables. She did not meet his gaze. "I understand you have been visiting the village," he said, his tone carefully neutral. Her fork paused for the briefest moment. "Yes, the winter was hard. I have been assisting where I can." "With Dr. Whitmore?" It was not a question. She set down her fork and finally looked at him. Her blue eyes were steady, a faint color rising in her cheeks. "Dr. Whitmore has been coordinating relief for the sick. I have been helping him distribute food and medicine." "You are the Duchess of Ashwick. You have no need to distribute anything yourself. Send a servant." "The servants are already overworked, and I am not too proud to offer my own hands." Julian leaned back, his jaw tight. "I do not think it appropriate for you to spend hours alone with an unmarried man, regardless of the charitable pretext." The flush on her cheeks deepened, but her voice remained calm. "I assure you, Your Grace, my conduct has been entirely proper. The village is full of witnesses, and I was unaware that my activities required your approval, since you have shown no interest in them whatsoever." The words hit him like a slap. He had no response. She rose from the table, her meal half finished. If you will excuse me, I am rather tired. Good night." She left him sitting in the candlelight, alone with the echo of a truth he had long avoided. The jealousy did not ease. It grew roots, twisted deeper. Julian began to notice things he had previously ignored. The way his steward, Mr. Collins, spoke of her Grace's village projects, with a respect Julian had never encouraged. The way letters arrived for Seraphina in handwriting he did not recognize. The way she smiled softly to herself when she thought no one was watching, a private happiness he had no part in. He started finding reasons to be in the same room. He would appear in the library when she was reading, take a chair by the fire, and pretend to review accounts. She would acknowledge him with a nod and then return to her book, utterly unbothered by his presence. He missed the days when she would have jumped at the chance to speak with him. He missed the eager light in her eyes. The realization crept up on him during a long, sleepless night. He missed his wife. Not the idea of her, not her function as a duchess, but her gentle voice, her quiet dignity, the way she had once looked at him as if he were the sun. He had been a fool, a cold, arrogant fool. But even as regret began to burn in his chest, a new fear followed. She had stopped looking at him, and she might never look at him again. The emotional turning point came on a stormy afternoon in late May. Dr. Nathaniel Whitmore arrived at Ashwick Manor, soaked to the bone, his face tight with urgency. He demanded to see the Duchess. Julian intercepted him in the entrance hall, bristling at the man's familiarity. "What business do you have with my wife?" Whitmore's eyes were wild. "There's been an outbreak of fever in the lower village. 3 children are critically ill. I need Lady Ashwick's help. She knows the families, she knows the treatments we've been using." Julian's impulse was to forbid it, to send the doctor away and lock his wife safely inside. But before he could speak, Seraphina was already descending the stairs, already pulling on her cloak, her expression fierce with purpose. "I'm coming, Nathaniel. I'll ride with you." "You will not," Julian said, stepping forward. "It's not safe. You could fall ill yourself." She met his eyes, and for the first time in months he saw real fire there. "With respect, Julian, I did not ask your permission. There are children dying. You have never cared how I spent my days before. Do not pretend to care now." She swept past him, Dr. Whitmore at her side. The door slammed. Julian stood frozen, the words "do not pretend to care" now ringing in his ears. He had earned every syllable. He did not sleep that night. The rain hammered the windows. He paced the library, drank brandy, imagined Seraphina bending over sickbeds, her skin pale with exhaustion, her gentle hands soothing fevered brows. He imagined her collapsing. He imagined never hearing her voice again. Just after dawn, unable to bear the torment any longer, he called for his horse and rode to the village himself. The dispensary was chaos. Cots lined the walls, filled with coughing children and anxious mothers. The air smelled of vinegar and herbs, and there in the center of it all was Seraphina. Her hair had come loose from its pins. Her gray dress was stained and damp. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. She was holding a little girl in her lap, spooning broth between cracked lips, murmuring soft words of comfort. She had never looked more exhausted. She had never looked more beautiful. Dr. Whitmore noticed Julian first. His expression flickered with surprise, then a guarded respect. "Your Grace, this is unexpected." Julian barely heard him. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside his wife, Seraphina. She looked up startled. "Julian, what are you doing here?" "I had to see you." His voice was hoarse. "I had to know you were safe." She stared at him, a confusion of emotions crossing her face. The little girl in her lap whimpered, and Seraphina's attention snapped back, her hand stroking the child's hair. "I'm fine. I'm exactly where I need to be. Please come home, you need rest. I'll send every resource I have, money, servants, physicians, just come home." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "You would send resources now. That is generous." But these people needed help months ago. They needed help when I first tried to speak with you about them, and you walked past me as if I were a ghost." The words struck him like stones. He had no defense. He opened his mouth, but she shook her head. "I'm not leaving until the fever breaks. You can stay or you can go, but I will not abandon them." He stayed. The Duke of Ashwick, who had never soiled his hands with common labor, spent the next 3 days in a cramped village dispensary. He fetched water, carried blankets, held a screaming toddler while Dr. Whitmore examined her throat. He did it all under the watchful eyes of his wife, who seemed too exhausted to be surprised. On the third night the fever broke. The children would live. The village exhaled. Serafina finally allowed herself to be led to a small cot in the back room, her body trembling with fatigue. Julian sat beside her, watching her sleep. The candlelight gilded her face, and he traced the delicate line of her jaw with his gaze. He had come terrifyingly close to losing her, not to another man but to her own quiet courage, to her profound indifference to his opinion. While she slept, Dr. Whitmore approached. "Your Grace, there is something you should see." He led Julian to a small room behind the dispensary. It was a schoolroom, Julian realized. Neat rows of benches, a chalkboard, children's drawings pinned to the walls. A small desk held a ledger. "This was her idea," Whitmore said quietly. "She funded it entirely from her own allowance, hired the teacher herself. She's been coming twice a week for months to read to the children. They adore her." Julian flipped open the ledger. Serafina's handwriting, meticulous and elegant, listed expenses for books, slates, firewood, medicine. She had been quietly pouring herself into this place while he had been ignoring her, belittling her, dismissing her. The shame was a physical weight. He set the ledger down and turned away, unable to speak. Whitmore watched him. "She never said a word against you, you know, not once. The villagers all assumed you supported her work. She let them assume." That cut deepest of all. She had protected his reputation even as he had starved her heart. Julian brought Serafina home the next morning in a carriage padded with blankets. She was too tired to protest. He carried her up the steps of Ashwick Manor himself, ignoring the wide-eyed servants, and laid her gently in her own bed. She slept for nearly an entire day. He sat in the chair by her window, watching, thinking, feeling the full, crushing weight of his regrets. When she woke, the afternoon sun was slanting through the curtains. She blinked, disoriented, and then saw him. "Julian, you're still here." "I'm not leaving," he said, "not unless you ask me to." She pushed herself up against the pillows, her expression wary. "You don't need to feel guilty. I did what I chose to do. It wasn't for your approval." "I know, that's what terrifies me." He leaned forward, his voice raw. "You stopped needing my approval months ago, didn't you? You stopped needing me at all." She did not deny it. Her silence was answer enough. "I have been blind," he said, the words scraping his throat. "I married you for duty and convenience, and I treated you as if you should be grateful for my indifference. I let you stand alone in every room, at every table, in every silence. And the worst part is, you never complained. You just faded, and I let you." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. "What do you want me to say, Julian? That I forgive you? That the years of loneliness can be erased because you finally noticed I exist?" "No, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "But I need you to know something." He opened the pouch and tipped its contents onto the coverlet, a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Serafina stared at it, her face going pale. "That's mine," she whispered. "I lost it years ago. I found it in your jewelry box last week. I wasn't searching, I was looking for—" He stopped. He had been looking for evidence of Whitmore, a confession he could not make without shame. "I opened it." She closed her eyes. Inside the locket was a tiny, faded miniature of a young girl with dark curls and a familiar smile. Julian's younger sister, Lydia. She had drowned in a lake on the Ashwick estate 7 years ago when she was 12. Or she would have drowned if a stranger had not pulled her from the water. "It was you," Julian said, his voice breaking. "The summer before our marriage was even discussed. You were visiting relatives near the estate. You saved my sister's life and you never told anyone." Serafina opened her eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks. She was so frightened. "I just swam out and brought her back. She begged me not to tell. She was afraid your father would be angry. I promised. And then when I married you, I didn't want you to think I was using it to make you care for me." Julian dropped to his knees beside the bed. The Duke of Ashwick, who had never knelt to anyone, knelt now to his wife. "You saved the person I loved most in this world, and I have repaid you with years of coldness. I don't know how to live with that." She looked at him and he saw the battle in her eyes, the old tenderness warring with the new walls she had built. "It wouldn't have mattered. You never saw me, Julian. Not really. I see you now." His voice cracked. "I see a woman who is brave and kind and far stronger than I ever knew. I see a woman who built a school with her own hands while her husband was too blind to notice. I see a woman I should have loved from the very first day." The word love hung in the air. He had never said it before, not to her, not in this marriage. She covered her mouth with her hand, a sob escaping. "It's too late, Julian. I loved you so much it nearly destroyed me. I can't go back to that." "I'm not asking you to go back." He reached for her hand tentatively, his fingers shaking. "I'm asking you to let me walk forward. With you, I know I have no right. I know I've given you nothing but silence. But I want to spend the rest of my life earning your trust if you'll let me." The tears were falling freely now, her shoulders shaking. She did not pull her hand away. The healing did not happen overnight. Trust, once shattered, reassembles slowly, piece by fragile piece. Julian began by doing what he should have done years before. He visited the village school openly, with Serafina at his side. He endowed it with a permanent fund, ensuring the teacher's salary and supplies for a decade. He sat on the tiny benches and let the children climb onto his knees, their sticky fingers pulling at his cravat, while Serafina watched with a smile that finally reached her eyes. He learned the names of every family in Ashwick Green. He commissioned repairs on their cottages. He listened to their troubles and, more importantly, he listened to his wife's counsel on how to solve them. Her wisdom, he discovered, was vast and practical, born of months spent walking among the people he had ruled from a distance. And he courted her, quietly, persistently. He left flowers on her breakfast tray. He wrote her letters, short and honest, confessing thoughts he had never spoken aloud. He asked her to walk with him in the gardens, and he talked to her, truly talked, about his fears, his failures, the loneliness he had never admitted even to himself. One evening in late summer, they sat on a stone bench overlooking the lake where Lydia had nearly died. The water was golden with sunset. Serafina leaned her head hesitantly against his shoulder. He did not move, hardly breathed, terrified of breaking the spell. "I used to come here alone," she said softly. "After we were first married, I would sit here and imagine you beside me, telling me stories about your childhood. I invented a whole version of you in my head. Was he a better man than I was?" She was silent for a moment. He was warmer, but he wasn't real. She lifted her head and looked at him. "You're real now, that's worth more." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "I love you, Serafina. I should have said it 1,000 times by now. I will spend every day of the rest of my life saying it." She did not say it back. Not yet. But she leaned into his touch, and her eyes held a hope that had been absent for so long it felt like a resurrection. Autumn arrived, and with it, a transformation. The cold Duke of Ashwick was cold no longer, at least not to his wife. The servants whispered about the change, the way his grace sought her grace's company, the way his gaze followed her across rooms with something like reverence. Serafina continued her work in the village, but now she did not slip through back gates. Julian accompanied her often. or waited with the carriage, or sat in the schoolroom doorway listening to her read aloud in a voice that made his chest ache with love and regret. Dr. Whitmore, to his credit, accepted the new order with grace. He had never been a rival for Seraphina's heart, only a friend who had seen her worth when her husband had not. Julian went out of his way to thank him, a stiff but genuine acknowledgement. One rainy afternoon, Julian found Seraphina in the library, a letter in her hand. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "It's from the orphanage in London," she said. "The one my mother supported before she died. They're struggling. I'd like to help them, but I'll need funds." He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, a habit he had come to cherish. "Whatever you need, it's yours." She searched his face. "You mean that, don't you?" "I mean everything I say to you now. I wasted too many words on silence." She set the letter aside. Then slowly she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved. "Julian," she whispered, I'm trying to trust this." "I know," he opened his eyes. "I'll wait forever if I must." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't want forever, I just want us." He pulled her gently into his arms, and she came willingly, her head tucking beneath his chin. They stayed like that for a long time, the rain pattering the windows, the fire crackling, two people who had traveled a long and painful road to finally arrive in the same moment. The confession, when it finally came, was not a dramatic declaration in a storm. It was a quiet evening in their private sitting room, a room he had once never entered. Seraphina had been reading aloud from a book of poetry, her voice soft and rhythmic. He had been watching her, not the pages, his heart so full he thought it might crack his ribs. She paused and met his eyes. "You're not listening." "I'm listening to you, not the words, just you." She closed the book. "Julian." "I know you haven't said it," he said gently. "You don't have to. I know I hurt you. I know love is not something I can demand." She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark garden. He waited, his pulse heavy. "I was so angry," she said. "For months I was so angry at you, and then I wasn't angry anymore. I was just empty. I thought I had used up all the love I had." He rose and came to stand behind her, not touching, just present. She turned. Her eyes were luminous, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's still there, Julian. I tried to bury it, but it wouldn't die. I love you. I have always loved you. That's the tragedy of it." He pulled her into his embrace, his face buried in her hair, and he wept. The Duke of Ashwick, who had faced down political rivals and business enemies without flinching, wept like a child in his wife's arms. "I don't deserve it," he choked. "No," she agreed softly, "but it's yours anyway." They held each other until the tears subsided, until the quiet of the house settled around them like a blessing. And when he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth, it was with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of atonement and devotion. Winter came, and with it a new rhythm. Ashwick Manor, once a cold fortress of duty, became a home. The village prospered under the combined care of the Duke and Duchess. The schoolroom buzzed with children's voices. The sick were tended, the hungry fed. Seraphina no longer walked through the halls alone. Julian was beside her, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, his head bent to catch her softest words. The staff smiled behind their hands. The tenants spoke of the Duke's transformation with a kind of wonder. One snowy evening, they returned from the village after delivering Christmas baskets. Their cloaks were dusted with white, their cheeks flushed with cold. In the great hall, Julian stopped her beneath the mistletoe a mischievous maid had hung that morning. "Look up," he said. She did, and laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that made his heart soar. "You planned this." "I wish I could claim credit." He cupped her face, his thumbs warming her chilled cheeks. "Seraphina Ashwick, I am more grateful for you than for anything in this world. You gave me a second chance I did not deserve." Everyone deserves a second chance, she murmured, if they are brave enough to take it. He kissed her then, softly, reverently, as the snow fell silently beyond the windows. It was a kiss that tasted of forgiveness and new beginnings, of pain transformed into something precious. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "Merry Christmas, Julian." "Merry Christmas, my love." He took her hand and led her toward the warm glow of the parlor, where a fire waited and a future stretched ahead, no longer cold, no longer lonely, but full of quiet, enduring joy. They had traveled through pain, hope, distance, jealousy, regret, and fear. They had confessed and been broken and been healed. And in the end they had found each other, not despite the scars, but because of them. The Duke of Ashwick had loved too late, but he had loved at last. And that love, hard-won and humble, would carry them through all the years to come. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you for watching and see you in the next amazing story.